Welcome to Ira's Everything Bagel, where I talk with intriguing people about everything, their passions, pursuits, and points of view. Imagine this, you're a film editor on the job, cutting commercials, and suddenly the job gets pulled from you. You now face the ever-present money and career issues. Well, what do you do next? My guest was trying to figure all that out when 2 days later, she gets a call at 2:45 in the morning. It's a job from a director who has a vision of filming the original story of Cinderella, written in China in 768 AD. In China, the caveat for my guest, she had to say yes now and be on location to hit the ground running in just several weeks. And oh, yes, the film would be told entirely in Mandarin, which of course is not a language she speaks. We'll find out what she speaks in a minute. My guest experienced all these and more. It's film editor Lisa Cheek. She is author of Sit, Cinderella, Sit, a mostly true memoir, available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the usual places. And for everything about Lisa, go to lisacheek.com and you can follow her on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And Lisa, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me here. I'm super excited to be here.
Thank you. I probably will use your skills since I stumbled on the intro a couple of times. I may have you edit my show, and that way it'll sound even better or look even better than if I tried to do it, which I will end up doing it because I don't want to pay you. Anyway, that's fine. So you had an interesting background, and then you had an even more interesting journey. So let's start with your background first before you decided to write the book and before you actually went to China. You were working in the commercial film industry. What was that like for you, and how long have you been at it?
I love commercials. I worked in promos first, for local broadcasting, and then I worked when I came out to LA a few years after working in local broadcasting.
Hey, wait,
I
stop. Wait a minute. I'm going to catch you on certain things here. You said in local broadcasting, then I moved to LA, so you have to identify your local or your locale.
okay. So I graduated from college in South Carolina, and I wound up working at two TV stations in Charleston before I came to LA. Actually, and then I moved to Charlotte, and I worked for a couple of years there. And when I came out, I was one of the first people who lucked out and trained on an Avid in 1991. And because storage was an issue at that time, um, features couldn't use it, and neither could television shows. So basically, the only people who were using the Avid were commercials. And that's how I landed in commercials.
And let's just, for our listeners and viewers, Avid is a software editing system that was one of the very first, if not the first.
Yes, nonlinear that you digitize to, and the drives were only 3 gigs at the time.
Yeah.
So it couldn't store a whole lot of stuff. And so because I knew how to use the software, I fell into commercials. I had no idea how much fun they were going to be. I loved it. I got to travel all kinds of places, and it didn't last very long. 30 seconds didn't take that long to cut. So they were in and out of my room, a couple of weeks, sometimes a month. I'd be on a job and then it would change. Sometimes I'd do comedy, sometimes it'd be pretty pictures. So the job always changed. It was very creative.
Well, how did people hear about you at the time when you started to develop in Los Angeles and started to get hired more and more for commercial editing? How did people hear about you? Just word of mouth primarily?
Word of mouth and producers, it was a lot of networking like you do with pretty much, I think, anything is networking. And yeah, and so many commercial directors become featured directors later in life. Everybody from Michael Bay to David Fincher to so many of them come up with commercials because there's a lot of money there. And they can also train and do, special effects can be done because at that time, it's very expensive to do them. And so when you only have to do some for a few seconds in the commercial,
Right.
agencies can afford that or products. So, yeah, it was a great, great training ground for so many people and to learn to tell a story in 30 seconds. It's quite
Yeah,
a challenge.
absolutely. It's a skill and it's a talent to do that. And also to be into the commercial for a product or service you may not normally use yourself, but you're able to see how that could work for other people. So that
Yeah.
was fine. So now what happens to you? You're working on a project and all of a sudden you're not working on a project.
Well, I'd been working with one particular editorial house for 5 years, and I was told when I first came to Hollywood, there is an age limit on things. And, I'm young and whatever, and, I don't really pay attention to it. But, eventually every year goes by and we get a little older. And at the time, I was told that agencies, commercials, they wanted young people. They wanted all the young editors to be cutting their stuff, which was under 40, 45. So once I hit 45, yeah, it was getting work is a lot harder. I do have a few friends who are still working in it, but they're few and far between. Most people move on to features if they want to continue editing.
So then you get a call in the middle of the night because obviously they're calling from China and they're not sure what time it is in the United States, or they didn't bother checking. But for you, it was an interesting call, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was because everybody, that's the other thing, when you're working in LA, everybody's got the side project that they're going to do, but making it actually come to fruition is very difficult, getting the money, getting the people, getting all of it together is it's a hard thing to do. So you just, or at least I was quite pessimistic about things. I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Everybody, right? They'll eventually, maybe if you meet the right person, maybe somebody will give you some money to make it, but it's very hard to do. So I just, figured it probably wouldn't happen like so many of the other projects I hear. And sure enough, he got the financing and the adventure was on.
As I mentioned in the opening, the film is in Mandarin.
Yes,
So how does that work for you as an editor who speaks absolutely no Mandarin? And you seem to speak English fairly well, but
thank you.
yes.
It's very limited, but I do get by on English. What I would say to you is the director pitched to me. He's like, "Oh, Lisa, everybody speaks Cinderella. There's a carriage, there's a slipper, there's a prince. It's all good. You'll be fine." And silly me, who, would cut a Taco Bell spot and then translate it into Spanish, thought, oh, big deal. I can do this, right? I've done a 30-second Spanish spot, which I actually studied Spanish for a couple of years. So, absolutely none in Mandarin. I didn't, I mean, I knew Shay. I knew thank you, and that was it.
Right.
So, yeah, it was definitely a bigger deal than just speaking Cinderella.
But you agreed to it, and now you uproot yourself and you moved to China, and everything gets going. Were you shocked at the cultural differences from the industry point of view? Not so much the cultural differences generally people have when they go to a different country, but you were working in a technical field which theoretically has similarities in terms of equipment, in terms of approaches, but still, I'm sure it was a different kind of shock to you.
Well, to get to the first location, it took me 4 days. So it was and then when we would go to the next location, it was always a day's drive away.
Right.
So they were really far and remote, and one village only had 100 people in it. And in order to get there, not only did we have to drive 8 hours from the last location, but we had to do an hour donkey ride down the mountain in order to get to this tiny village.
I can see why you wrote a book about this. Just that alone, the experiences that you had when you when you drove and rode. What do you do in terms of equipment? I mean, how does that work? Or do others carry that for you?
Oh, yeah. Well, we had, in fact, the village that we went to. Only the women in the village were carrying all our equipment down the side of the mountain. When we got down to the our guest house, I realized that all the men were there playing mahjong and drinking beer and smoking cigarettes. It was quite like, wow.
That's a reverse.
So the women were totally running the village. They were taking care of everybody. And yeah, it's definitely every day was a new experience. It just, it was great. I never knew what I was in store for.
And sure, and then lugging along that moviola with you. I mean, that must have been hard. No, I'm joking because obviously that's not used in the digital world anymore. But I just had that image of you with this big moviola going to
No, but
a
I
village.
did learn a new software to go. I learned Final Cut to go there. So I had a lot of Final Cut for Dummies. I did have a lot of books that I was carrying down the side of the mountain in case anything went wrong. But I had a really exceptional assistant who took care of everything. He was magical. He just was crazy good, and he spoke 4 languages. And he, unfortunately, he had to talk to me a lot because no one else could.
Right. It is. But
I
you,
got very lonely. I did
I
until,
could see though the two of you bonding, given the fact, yeah, because nobody speaks what you're talking about. So, well, the producer that called you originally, was that producer on the set with you, and but not speaking English? How did that work?
he's American, and so he and I were the two that went over to China. And he had an assistant who's, but the entire crew was Chinese and didn't speak any English. I lived with the camera crew, 14 men who didn't speak a word of English in a guest house.
So the only three people that spoke English was your assistant, the producer, and the producer's assistant.
There were two women that worked in the production office, but I didn't see them much. Like I never saw the director. He was always on the set and I was back in, my room cutting. So I hardly ever saw him the entire 3 months I was there.
Amazing. Why did you decide to write a book about your experience? I mean, I think you should, just based on the first part that you talked about. But when you got back, you said, you know what? I've got to write a book about my experiences in China and in this production.
Actually, my father died almost 6 years ago, and I went to see a channeler because I wanted to know how he was doing. And he told me, by the way, that heaven has the best library. So just letting you know. Um, but while I was there, she said to me, you've done this adventure and you need to write about it, and you need to let people know because I was working on a novel at the time, and she said you need to go back and do this first. So
Yeah, while it's fresh in your mind, absolutely.
I did. I went back and wrote it and had a great time doing it, and um, I'm having fun now, seeing where it takes me and working on two more memoirs actually.
So will it be translated into Chinese?
I have no idea.
Mandarin?
I know it's being sold in in England and a couple of other places, but I don't know about China. I don't know what's going on there.
And how did you get that title, Sit Cinderella Sit, a mostly true memoir? Part one would be the Sit Cinderella Sit, and then part two, I'd like to ask you about mostly true memoir. So what parts are not true? But we'll get to that in a minute. How about the first part of the title?
Well,
Available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the usual places.
yeah, favorite local bookstore. Yeah, I adopted two dogs while I'm there. I rescued two dogs. So the title, and I have to leave my best friend behind when I go to China, which is very heart-wrenching because he was always by my side. So it's a command that we use, when we speak to our four-legged friends, and who doesn't want to see Cinderella in a title? And honestly, for me, I sat. That's what I did. I sat the entire time looking at the Cinderella movie, and that's what an editor does. We sit and sit and sit and sit. So it felt just like the perfect title.
I agree. And I have another question regarding your sitting in a minute, but let's talk about the mostly true part. What are the parts that are, I would say, embellished if need be, or are they 98.6% true, the
Yeah,
book?
they're 98.6% true.
Okay.
I had to slide some timelines. Of course, I changed everybody's name. That's all typically done in memoir. Um, so, I was working with that, and it's that's why originally, like I said, I started telling the story as a novel, and everything that happened to me was so extraordinary, and people needed so I owned it, right? And I just said, this is what happened to me, and life is an adventure, isn't it the greatest?
And did you take notes along the
No,
way? No.
no, I had my Facebook every day. I joined Facebook in order to go to China. It was 2009, and they had just started up. So I had photographs that I tried to upload every day, but there was only a sentence or two with them. So, but it was great because it did jog my memory
Right.
and
But how could you
help.
remember everything though, even with the Facebook jogs? How did you how did you sit down and write that much material and remember so much? Because it was an intense experience and it was over obviously a long time. So how did that work for you?
Well, I worked off a lot of my own photographs. I had a ton of photographs that I had taken, and you know, I was so present with all of it going on every day that I really, because I knew when I took the job, I was like, this is a once in a lifetime, whether the movie does anything or not, because most movies are not very good. Most of them, we all take to earn a living, but they're not going to be winning Academy Awards or, even film festivals. So we either do it for the people or for because we need the money. And, I certainly did it for the people. I wanted this adventure and I wanted to go there because I had no idea what was going to happen to it.
How long were you there?
That's the other thing that's not, mostly true. I was in mainland along the Tibetan border for 3 months while we shot. And then I end the book there. But I then flew to Hong Kong and I stayed in Hong Kong for another 3 months editing the film. But Hong Kong's a big city with a 7-Eleven and Chanel and all of that, right? So it didn't
Sometimes a Chanel in a 7-Eleven.
exactly. So I didn't feel the need to tell you all about Hong Kong, and it
Oh,
ends with
that
me
makes sense because
returning there.
everybody can relate to an urban environment, but this is a unique experience you had. I want to get back to something that, and I told you I would get back to it, the sitting part. This intrigues me in this sense. For those of us who are writers or who are editors or who sit a lot for whatever reason, uh, I have a routine to not sit too long because I don't think it's healthy for the human body. Did you set a little timer so that every 25 minutes or hour you would get up, stretch, walk around, or were you so engrossed, focused in the editing that all of a sudden it's 5 hours later and you realize your body is frozen in the seat?
Yeah, that's usually how it happens to me because when I'm in it, I'm in it, and it's really fun. And it's just like that with writing. When I'm on a roll, I don't want to like take a chance to get up and leave. Although I do like using Hemingway's way, when you end your day of writing, leave something to come back to. I think that's really important.
That's a very good tip for newly minted writers, editors, etc., painters, everything.
Yeah. So
Any,
you're not looking
any
at something blank. You're not looking at a
right.
blank page. You've got, oh yeah, I was writing about this.
No, absolutely. When you are working and you are editing. So you're looking, as you said, a lot of your job is staring at the screen and you're looking at different things. And I assume there are different camera angles as most of the time there are. And so you've got separate, and in a digital world, it's different than the way they used to do it in old Hollywood, but you're looking at different scenes and you can match up different camera angles to those scenes. But that means you've got to go over it, I would imagine, each scene several times in order to determine from your perspective as an editor what will work best.
Oh, totally. I mean, in the book, I actually discuss about all the different ways I cut a scene before I would send it to the director so he could see what the coverage was and what we had. Um, yeah, that's what we do. We work it and work it. And it's actually my favorite part in writing. I really don't like putting the original words on the page. Once it's down there, I have a great time. It's fun. I can add to it, subtract. I can work it any way I want to, but it is a bit scary when there's nothing there to
We
start
should
with.
go back to Hemingway's suggestion. So
Exactly, exactly. Hence why that works, I think.
yeah, when you were editing the film and you send what you think will work to the director, if he doesn't like something, you've obviously coded it in a way that you go back and change something out if you need to, right?
Yeah, he would let me know, like, is there this shot or is there a shot? Is there two shot? Is there did we get a good wide? Maybe we should have gotten wider because it's not like he could do pickups once we left.
Oh yes, you're not going to go down that mountain again.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you when you well maybe you will. I don't know for the adventure of it. You seem like an adventurous sort, so I think you might do it again. If they called again, would you go?
Oh, totally. I
Yeah,
mean,
I think
totally. I mean, what a wonderful. I'm a girl who's it's always I'm something fabulous always comes out of it. It just does, whether it's meeting people or, getting to go see all these amazing places to, getting to rescue two dogs and spending time with them,
I
you
want to
know?
talk to you about the two dogs in a minute, but going back to that crew that didn't speak any English and you didn't speak Mandarin, was there still an understanding between you and the crew over the period of time that you were shooting?
Well, my assistant was gone for the first couple of weeks. He was on the set because they needed him on the set. And so I got very lonely, needless to say. But eventually he wound up being by my side a good part of the time. And, he would translate things for me and I could have conversations with people. But it was always, there's so much communication that happens silently. You don't have to speak the same language to share a smile or to let someone know that, they're glad you're here. And I really felt that with a lot of these. And a lot of them, I didn't even know their names. But they all, I knew I would be cared for. I knew I'd be looked after. And that was a big lesson for me because I think I always felt like I had to do a lot of things on my own. And I didn't have to speak Mandarin in order to be cared for.
There was the human connection.
Mhm.
And
So
speaking
much
of
fun.
the human connection, there was the canine connection
Mhm.
with two rescue dogs. And where did you find these two dogs, and were you able to bring them from China to the United States?
They did not come back because I had to go to
Hong
I had
Kong.
to spend right 3 months in Hong Kong. So I found homes with them on the crew. It was super
Right.
sweet.
Right.
But yeah, the first few, we were in our first location 5 weeks, and maybe it was 4 weeks. Anyway, however long we were there, my assistant was on the set a lot. They needed him up there, and so he was up there backing up drives and doing, and he'd show up at night and bring me the footage. And so, and he was always, he'd hook him up and have to go. He was exhausted. He needed it. So we didn't spend any time talking. And when he's not around, I didn't really have anybody else to talk to.
Well,
So
you had Facebook though.
I did, but it was so new back then. I didn't know that many people on Facebook. So, and it took a long time to upload things in these tiny villages. Let me tell you, I would do it in the middle of the night because that's when I had the entire bandwidth, these little places.
Still
But
impressive though, that if you think about it, that even in these small villages, they at least had some ability to connect to the
I
internet.
know, crazy, right? And you'd be in the
Yeah.
middle in these rice fields and you'd hear all their mobiles going off. It was so funny. Everybody had a mobile phone. It was
It's
really
crazy.
funny. Um, yeah, because I think whatever I had was, well, it was right. I think the iPhone came out right after I got back. So, but I was amazed at how many everybody, there was no one there that didn't have a cell phone. So
Same,
everybody
I
was
think in
connected.
Africa where everybody has a cell phone, they jumped the idea of trying to install landlines in rural areas and in Africa. So they just jumped ahead technologically to the cell phone, and now everybody's connected. So yeah, that was a win for you. When you were sitting editing, where were you? You weren't on set, as you mentioned. Your assistant would be busy on set a lot of the time before he came back and spent more time with you. But where were you ensconced?
I was typically in a guest house somewhere that one place had, well, the first place was a hotel and I actually had a suite. So I edited in my living room in the suite. And then from then on, uh, one place we just edited outside because I had a laptop and that's what I was working on. So we actually sat outside for the 5 days or 6 days that we were there. So, which was really wonderful because it was the most extraordinary view I'd ever seen. I mean, over the Yangtze River with these huge, majestic mountains, and it was just beautiful.
But how do you edit in the daytime outside with the sun beating down on you?
I don't know. Somehow we had something overhead. I seemed to be okay. I seemed to be because it was nice. It was a bit chilly, but I wore my scarf and my mittens and I went out there and like it was great.
And you had power enough because clearly a laptop battery's not going to last that long.
Yeah.
So you were able to, even with your laptop, and I don't know what size screen it was. I know it's a little technical here, but I'm fascinated by it. When you're editing and you're looking at different scenes, are you bringing up 4 or 5 different scenes on the screen at one time, and so you see which angle to use?
Um,
I should say shots rather than
right.
than scenes.
I was going to say, typically I'd look at a wide shot and, I had a tiny screen, but when we got back to Hong Kong, I had big screens that I could work with and could actually see if there was something in the shot that shouldn't be or whatever. But I did certainly the best I could with working off a laptop.
Yeah, it's always a challenge, no matter how big the laptop is. And you're outside, which was fascinating on that level too.
Oh,
The
yeah.
if you had to list the top 3 experiences that you took away, or the top two experiences that you took away? You had so many experiences, which is why you wrote the book. But what would you say is the most meaningful to you? And maybe
There's
just one.
there's so many. I mean, life as an adventure is totally one. You just never know what's going to happen. You think your life is over because you lost your job, and then, the next thing I know, windows open and I'm on my way to China, right?
No, your life is only over when you lose your life, but when you lose your job, it's not over. Correct.
Yeah. And kindness is a universal language. It is being kind. And, you know, I think what the big one was too, what other people think of me is none of my business and not always accurate. Just because somebody says I'm old. I went to these fabulous places in China where all these women who were much older than I were climbing up the side of a mountain with a bag of rice on their back,
And
and
also,
they're revered.
yes, exactly. I was going to say they're venerated in China. Senior, well, we call seniors here, but older people are venerated in China, not so much in Western culture, with some exceptions. But yeah, I think it's more a state of mind, and I think your experience probably convinced you that you could do whatever you want from this point on. You don't have to worry about, as long as you feel good and your mind is working and you have talent and skill, that's all you need.
Exactly. And what an amazing adventure it always is. And to be open, because there's magic everywhere. And sometimes it's in the simplest moments. And then other times it's like, who knew? I flew to China, right?
When you came back, though, did your mindset change? It continue to change because it obviously changed once you were there, and you had this insightful look at what could be and can be. And you mentioned the fact that you could other people are not going to define you. You're going to define you, and you can do what you want. Was it a little bit of a cultural shock in reverse coming back to the United States?
I definitely, people live minimally there. They live very minimally. And, I certainly came home and looked at all my stuff and thought, really? I don't need this to get by, right? In fact, some ways it weighs us down. But, we come from a very consumer-oriented society where China is not that way.
Well, but the economy is based on production, though, in both societies. So that's an issue too. Last tip that you have for anybody that wants to read your book, what do you think people will get out of the book?
I look forward to hearing it. I want to hear what everybody, because I think everybody gets something different out of it. So that's what's so great about meeting your readers is that, I'll find out what they thought and what were their favorite parts. I wrote what I thought was interesting, so it'll be interesting to hear what other people find interesting.
That makes sense. Well, that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been film editor Lisa Cheek. She is author of Sit, Cinderella, Sit, a mostly true memoir. It's available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and all the usual places. And for everything about Lisa, go to lisacheek.com, and you can follow her on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Lisa, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. I loved it. I had so much fun.
I did too. And join us every Thursday for a new schmear on Ira's Everything Bagel.